All right, so hello everybody. My name is Chris, I work for Boral, and today, in keeping with the theme of the conference, I'm gonna give you, go over with hygiene that works. I'm gonna give you a simple method for measuring risk to exposure to dust, inhalable dust. All right, now, there's a number of health risks associated with dust, so I'm gonna focus on COPD, okay? So chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, for those of you not familiar with that term. Basically, we're looking at COPD as an inflammatory response to the lung. It impedes the airflow, and more commonly known as bronchitis and emphysema. Has a long latency period, so it can last well 25, 30 years and appear at the end of your working career, just when you're ready to retire. The biggest cause of COPD is smoking, as we all know, but you can also have COPD from air pollution, secondhand smoke, silica exposure, and turns out it can also come from mineral dust. Okay. Now at Boral, we have about 85 quarries. About half of them are low quartz or no quartz. So in the past, we didn't think mineral dust was a problem, but now we know there is a risk of COPD coming from that. Okay, so now, as we've probably seen, these particles come in various shapes and sizes, okay, and we're probably all familiar with the different fractions: inhalable dust, thoracic, respirable, but there's still actually very little data which shows which of the fractions gives us the greatest COPD risk. And my money is actually on thoracic. So, in a crushing operation, as some of you may be familiar, we take big rocks and we turn them into little rocks. And as you go, the total dust emitted gets bigger and bigger through each of the processes, and you can see that in terms of the amount of dust that's given off. That's inhalable dust. We also have issues as you go with respirable dust, and you can see that as the process goes, the amount of respirable dust also increases from step to step. Okay? Now, we're all familiar with the exposure standard, 10 milligrams for inhalable, 3 milligrams for respirable, and the trigger points. So what do you measure for when you're in a dusty environment like that? Respirable, or do you measure inhalable? Well, it turns out you do both. So you measure both inhalable and respirable, and what you're trying to do is then actually calculate the ratio of respirable to inhalable. Okay, that ratio is important, as you'll see in a minute. If you start with the exposure standard, remember it was 3 and 10, so calculate that ratio, respirable to inhalable, and you get 0.3. Okay, so as we'll see, when we get ratios above that, respirable dust dominates, and below that, inhalable dust dominates. You'll see what I mean. So now when you start measuring your actual segs, in this case we've got, these are workers that are actually close to the dust sources, you'll find that those ratios come in below that line. Okay, so in other words, they'll exceed inhalable standard before they exceed the respirable standard. And as you look at workers that are farther away from the dust sources, you'll see they come up above that line. So they'll exceed the respirable standard before they exceed the inhalable standard. Right? So what does that all mean? Well, what it means is, if you've got workers close to a dust source, you should be measuring inhalable. So basically, we're talking plant operators, in this case, it's bin truck operators and maintenance workers, lab techs, et cetera. If you've got workers that are more isolated from sources or farther away, you should be measuring respirable. So in this case, these are HME, heavy mobile equipment operators, right? So they're going to be, they're going to exceed the respirable before they exceed their inhalable. Now, if we go back and have a look at the trigger points, what was 0.3 actually drops now 1 in 5 to 0.2. So what that means is, using a trigger point, that a lot more segs will fall into the respirable category. Okay? So you should be measuring respirable for them. So I've just gone through here in terms of controls, just to show you a couple of different things. So obviously, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So preventing the dust from becoming airborne, we focus a lot of these types of controls in Boral. So a lot involving water. Where there is still dust in the workplace, we isolate the workers as much as we can. So we have pressure control rooms, HEPA filtration systems, control cabs, pressure control cabs, and the like. And we can't forget, of course, the importance of respiratory protection programs and also controls for minimizing the secondary dust sources, and obviously involved, so that's a bat booth, scrubbing the boots as we talked about earlier, Lori, and it's very important. So this is what the final message is: know your dusts, know your fractions, measure the right one, and you'll avoid this happening to your workers. That's it. Thank you.